Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a bucket. Ain't a bucket.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Well,
We get straightened out?
no, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next.
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
All right. Hey, John, we're back again.
Hi, Phil. Hi, friends.
Oh, we're here for your weekly dose of craziness. And boy, and with that in mind, today's topic, we're going to teach you how to be an absolute psychopath.
Yep. Over-focused on getting somewhere, I guess, would be the topic of the day.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, it's going to go in a different direction today. That's for sure. But before we jump into that, I want to go ahead and get everybody up to speed. We really appreciate, once again, your patronage and listening to the show. We've gotten lots of wonderful feedback, and we want to let you know that we are working on things daily, and I mean daily. We're working on stuff. So every week we'll give you a little updates, but wanted to let you know just a couple of things, that it will not be long, maybe a week or so, before you folks that have these dedicated iPod, or I should say these different dedicated podcast apps, that you'll be able to search us on there and find us, and then be able to download us through our RSS feed. And what we're talking about are apps that get their podcasts from iTunes or Google Play Store. Some of these apps are like Beyond Pod, Stitcher, Podomatic, and John, you've got don't you have another? There's another app that you use.
I use Podomatic.
Yeah, So
iTunes too.
Right. So you guys get the idea.
Oh, Spotify has.
There you go.
That stuff.
Yeah. So our podcast has been submitted and accepted to these different apps, and so they just basically have a lag time of like a week or so, when they do these batch updates, for the new podcasts that are coming out. So we'll keep you up to date as much as we can on, of course, the show, and as well on our Facebook page, which, perfect segue, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast. And you can also catch us at Twitter, twitter.com/DW Groovecast. And, of course, you can email us directly at drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com, which I'll also go ahead and tell you, we are in the middle of creating and updating our YouTube page as well. It's unbelievable, John. We're growing in leaps and bounds here.
Crazy.
I am telling you. So the podcast will, of course, be available on the YouTube channel, but we're also going to eventually have some of our own dedicated and exclusive content that will pop up from time to time also. John and I have big ideas for that, so we're going to go ahead and move on, and like I titillated you and tantalized you earlier, we're going to teach you how to be a psychopath today. So John and I we're very big on making sure that we'll call it our personal responsibility, like the things that we can control prior to going to a gig. Everything down from setting your alarm clock to making sure you have like extra felt washers in your gear. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about that, and we're going to tell you our psychopathic stories also that have to go with how we arrived at being such lunatics when it comes to making sure that we don't screw things up. So, John, why don't you entertain us with your nightmare that you had?
Okay. Well, I asked Phil the other day if he ever had a recurring nightmare that was, gig related. And that was kind of like, hey, if you do, we could go on and on about this and make it kind of entertaining. But I actually did for the better part of 10 years maybe. But it was based on an experience and a gig where I was late. Long story short regarding that, I was relying on someone to pick me up for a gig that was probably about 45 minutes away, and they showed up late. Therefore, I'm late for the gig. And even crazier, it was my high school band director, who is my biggest influence. He had a big band that played once a month, and you just go in and read it down and this and that. And needless to say, I was excited and flattered and honored to do that. Well, I show up about 20 minutes past start time, and as I'm loading in my first batch of gear, there's an entire big band of my past band directors, the area pros, and everybody in between playing big band tunes with no drums. And it was the most miserable experience I've had in my entire career, and it just wrecked me on so many levels. So just sit on that for a minute and imagine the sheer misery.
We're laughing with you, John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to pretend I'm laughing even at this point. So I ended up having a recurring nightmare where I'd show up to a gig late, and I'm loading in, and the anxiety and all of that, just reliving all that, making it even more, I'm sure, like dramatic and miserable. And, I think my junior high band director, who was a real tyrant, it was his gig, so that kind of ties into even more anxiety and what have you. And I remember, and again, this is recurring, as I'm setting up, I'm stressed out, I'm freaking out. As I'm setting up, I'm kind of getting more relaxed, like, hey, I'm getting it together, it's coming together. And I'm actually like, even maybe playing on like partially set up drums as I'm setting up other things and kind of joining the circus, and feeling better, like, hey, at least I'm contributing and it's all going to be okay, guys. And I finally get set up and we play a few tunes and it's cool. And I just have this bright idea that there's this 1-bar break coming up at the end of this chorus, so we're grooving along, everything's cool, and everybody's pretty happy at this point, and I'm feeling confident. Well, on this 1-bar break, man, I'm going to hit that downbeat, and I'm going to flip out of my throne and do a complete flip and come back down and just wow these people.
This is the one time I wish that we were doing a video podcast so you could see him right now.
Yeah, it's sort of like humor, fear, I'm ready to throw up. Anyway, so yeah, I'm convinced that in this 1-bar break, I can somehow flip out of my throne, completely do a 360 and land on my butt and hit the downbeat. Needless to say, I've made the flip, it's all good, but I'm coming down and I realize I'm not going to make it to the downbeat. And anxiety just revisits the situation in droves, and I maybe I wake up at this point, or maybe I just crash and burn, and he wears me out. I don't remember some of those details. It's been a while, but yeah, a recurring nightmare based largely on being late for a gig. And I think I don't think I've ever been late for a gig since, and I think I was 20 when that happened. So here we go as to how to avoid being late.
So we could say this nightmare was actually a productive dream.
Yeah, I guess you can. Yeah.
And when you did the flip in your dream, did you come out of it unscathed, other than being late on the downbeat? Were you physically okay? See, I'm going somewhere with this, John.
I don't know. I think probably I was so freaked out that I might have broken my arm and not realized it. Those part of the details in that part of the dream, I was so focused on that I'm not going to make the downbeat that whatever happened afterwards, I really can't answer.
See, a very jaded friend of yours and mine would tell you that any gig that you can walk away from is a good gig. So
at this point, I have to agree.
Yeah. So
even hobbling away, which is pretty common at this point.
Yeah,
I'm happy.
So our listeners now have a good idea of what has turned John into a psychopath. Now I'll tell you my story that turned me into a psychopath. And John, you don't know this story at all. I haven't told you this story, and it involves craziness and colorful characters, shall we say, on top of that. But let me tell you, there's a lot of common threads in this, and it has to do with when I was in school up at Tennessee. One of the most influential educators in like the studio jazz department or just the jazz department is a fellow named Jerry Coker. And I virtually anybody who's involved in this kind of education knows who this guy is and knows how important he is to this. So he's a bit of a larger than life figure, even though he's just the nicest guy you could ever meet. And he has his wife is named Patty Coker, who is also a very gifted jazz vocalist and brought a lot to the department from the standpoint of being able to teach vocalists some things as well. And by the way, side note, and I'll get back on track. I know that Jerry and Patty are not doing so well right now. They're getting a little bit up there in age and in years and whatnot, so we'll send some good vibes out to them. But anyway, back to the story. Jerry and Patty had asked me to play on a float in a downtown Knoxville parade. And this would have been, and it was in the morning. Let me say this parade was an early morning parade. Mm-hmm. It was one of those things where you had to be down there and set up on this float. It was probably like around
4:30.
Yeah, right, yeah. It was probably closer to like 7 in the morning, for like an 8 o'clock start. And John, let me set the table by saying this sucker was televised also. It was on local TV, right?
Big time.
Yeah. So it was going to be myself and Jerry and Patty and some of Knoxville's other finest musical craftsmen were going to be aboard this float going through downtown Knoxville. Well, as luck would have it, the night before, I had a late night bar gig, one of those jobs that probably finishes around 2 in the morning or so. And then, of course, any self-respecting 20-year-old college student at that time is not going to go straight home after that. Of course not.
Go to Denny's.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Or somewhere.
You call it Denny's, I call it, well. And so anyway, I obviously didn't roll in till the wee hours of the morning, but I did set my alarm, right? Of course, I didn't necessarily pay attention to that alarm. What happened was I either turned it off or hit snooze and then turned it off. Had my phone turned off, had my answering machine at that time turned down. And so I woke up that morning at probably 9 o'clock in the morning, in time to turn on my answering machine, hear the panicked messages from Patty and Jerry, and then, this is the best part of the story, turn on the TV to see the float go by with the fantastic drummer Samurai Celestial playing drums. And for those of you who don't know who Samurai is, Samurai he passed away several years ago. Samurai was one of the drummers for Sun Ra Celestial Orchestra. So that was quite an interesting combination. It was Samurai Celestial with Patty and Jerry and some other folks that were on there. And so I sat there in like a sweaty back, cold sweat moment because I was totally MIA, for this gig. And honestly, I cannot even remember what happened after that. In other words, going back and talking with Jerry or Patty, it seems like I either blocked it out or they just didn't even mention it because they were able to get Samurai there in time to play. So
I'm guessing the first.
Yeah. So that is the story that leads to my neuroses,
Incredible.
So John and I are going to tell you about the things that we do up to this day that keeps our mental faculties in check when it comes to making sure that we don't forget a bunch of stuff and that we're not late and that we're just all around good, responsible gentlemen when it comes to being stewards of the gig, making sure that we're there and we have everything we need. So what we're going to do is we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the things like lists and different things that we include on our gig. We're just going to kind of bounce back and forth and talk about these things. And kind of what I do is I'm a list guy, John. As you can tell, I actually have my list in front of me right now. And so what I do is I make lists, and especially on these lists, what I do is put things on there that are a little bit that I have to take to a gig or that I have to do for a gig that might be a little bit out of the ordinary. In other words, make sure that some things that, especially if there's extra pieces of gear that I might have to take. Like, for example, if I'm doing either like a theater gig or if I have to do some kind of an award show or something like that includes a lot of extra instruments, I make sure that I will make a list of things, everything from like these accessories, like say if I have to bring cowbells or wood blocks, wind chimes, even if I have to bring things like stand lights, those type things. That's one thing that I do. I absolutely make sure that I have a list of gear that's like not commonly in my, my travel setup. I make sure I have that. And with that in mind, let me say this: something that I think is a very important part and kind of a bit of a neglected or underappreciated part of gear that I have. I have one of those big SKB master cases, so to speak. Right. It's just a large case that doesn't have anything. There's no dividers, anything on the inside. It's just a master case that you can put all kinds of things in, and that's the case that I put these extra pieces of gear in. Mm-hmm. So I'll put those things in there. Another thing that I'll do is, and this is like well ahead of the gig, if it's a venue that I'm not familiar with, I make sure that I look at it on a map, sometimes even with like Google Earth. Look at this venue, look and see if I can see where the loading, like the loading dock, the loading area is. Also look for parking at that time also to see kind of how far away or how close it is so I can kind of get my mind set,
right?
If I have to do that. And then the other thing is I will also be very diligent from the standpoint of estimating my travel time, because I always like to try and get to the gig at least a minimum of 1 hour prior to any sound check.
Yeah.
So
same.
Yeah, that little list is kind of we'll call it my preliminary or the days before list that I like to do.
Yeah, mine. I'm similar in that. I kind of have two steady gigs, which helps routine quite a bit, and my gear for my regular band that does like corporate and wedding stuff, it just kind of I have a kit pretty much dedicated to that gig, and then a universal case, if you will, with electronics and ear and all that set up that just kind of stays together. So I rarely am forgetting anything for that. The Sunday morning is cymbals, and I have a backpack that just has everything I need in it, that stick bag and a metronome and whatever. So I'm never tapping into either of those things. Outside of that, I am just diligent in a list of things. I have to do it just because I'm not doing a whole lot of different gigs right now. So if I have like this current thing I'm doing, my whole setup's a little different, and I make sure I have a list that I made for that gig now, and I use a different kit that helps, different hardware, so it's not switching out. That's dangerous. Oh, I'll grab this pedal for that gig, and it'll be in this bag, and then you get, I really try to avoid that kind of thing. I think an investment of a second. I actually have 3 sets of hardware now that it really eliminates some of that and worthwhile expense to have.
Right.
Not flipping back and forth. Other than maybe a throne, I use the same throne all the time, pretty much. But.
Right. I do the same thing. And just to clarify, you're talking about having like 3 separate sets of hardware that never gets interchanged. In other words, it's the kind of thing where you know that this hardware bag or this hardware case goes with this kit. Mm-hmm. It's just automatic that it goes that way.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And some of that gets into, like with one vintage kit, I use a snare stand for the mounted tom. Some different things where...
That's very hip, man.
Man, I'm trying. I can't wear skinny jeans anymore, so I got to do something.
Says you.
Fit in.
Yeah.
In any event, that kind of thing is huge, in just not having something forgotten and all that. I think it's worth investing in to have that set up. And then the other thing too, like I just, for some reason, I always, before I go to bed the night before, even, I like departure time, all that stuff, I just need it in my brain so I can go to sleep. I mean, I'm talking like if I have a Saturday night gig and it's Friday night and I don't even leave until 4 in the afternoon, I want to know just where that day I'm not like running blind.
It's funny. I'm at that's the exact area that I'm going to next. Is like the night before kind of thing. And let me back up and say this. I really didn't know you were a list guy, John.
Yeah. Well,
that's
outside
the
of my regular
Buddhist
routine,
in us, man. That's a very Buddhist kind of thing.
Or senior citizen kind of thing. But that's another assessment that we'll just avoid talking about in depth.
Yeah. Well, my kind of what I talked about before is kind of like my day or two before things that I do when I'm checking in and trying to get myself set up for a gig but the night before I have a couple little things that I do also that again it's just for my peace of mind so that I can rest easily, so to speak. What I'll do is I'll make sure first off that my car is ready. Right, the night before, make sure I've got some gas in it. Because, man, let me tell you, there is nothing worse than, especially if you've kind of got a routine that you want to be at a certain place an hour before the gig, and then you never know, man. Sometimes you can go to 2 or 3 gas stations and wait 15 minutes.
True.
Trying to get gas. So I try to be ready to go with that prior to, so it just doesn't cause any more worry, with that. And then I also really make sure that if there's any specific attire requirements for a gig, whether it be a suit, a tux, or just any other kind of thing, I always make sure that it's clean, and if need be, that it's pressed, that it looks decent. I do
a thing where I have 2 snare drums in a 14 by 12 by 14 hard case, and then a floor tom and a mounted tom all stacked. I actually the bag for the 12, the smaller tom, I hang my clothes off the handle of that bag so it's right there. I don't forget it. And I also have a backpack that I have different things in, shoes if I'm changing shoes, and a water bottle, and that sits right there next to my cymbal bag stacked against that. So everything literally is like right together. It's just compacted up and stacked up, and everything I'm going to take is right there. Yeah, and that if you leave your clothes hanging in the kitchen, and you're late or you're thinking about something else, put it all together. Right,
and that is also what I think of in terms of that is I'm a very kind of a visual guy from the standpoint if I can kind of see everything, so to speak, where it's supposed to be, in my storage. And
in the car once you're loaded.
And in the car, there's a very kind of a Tetris-like geometric thing, that you make sure. And if something's out of whack, you can just feel it and see it, so to speak. So that's a good point, man.
I always load my car exactly the same every time, and it's huge. In that
I do too.
You just recognize right away if something's out of whack.
Yeah, and then hey, John, check this out. This is in direct psychoses to my story that I told you about missing that morning gig. If I have, this is a day before thing. If I have a morning gig, like the next morning, and it's like an 8 a.m. call time or something like that, I will not set 1 but 2 alarms, and I will actually set that thing when I wake up the morning before, not the night before. And the reason being is, again, what if that night before, let's say you have a gig, it's a late gig, you're exhausted, you come in at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning,
Just forget.
you forget. You know, I mean, it's not that likely, but why tempt fate, so to speak?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I do. I have a set time that I wake up for my Sunday morning church gig, and that alarm, I could just leave it on, actually.
Yeah.
You know, a rare Sunday I'll miss. I might forget to turn it off and then wake up everybody on the bus, which would be annoying. But
Yeah.
so I've tried to be on top of it, but I'm a rebel in that I don't do 2 alarms, and that maybe I should.
Yeah.
I'm not a heavy sleeper, which is a big part of a lot of people I know will say, man, I got 2 alarms and they're just cranking them out because they sleep heavy.
You know,
and I don't have that problem, thank God. But
I'm not. I don't necessarily know that I'm a heavy sleeper. I think I'm just, again, a psychopath from the standpoint of what if the power goes out on
I can appreciate that.
my other alarm.
Sure.
Because the other one I'll set is on my phone, which is of course battery powered, and it'll go off. So I think that's the only reason that I do that.
Right on.
So, John, what I want to talk about next is, now that we've kind of gotten everything ready for the day before or the days before and the night before, I want to talk about the day of the gig, and in particular about extra gear that I make sure that I have that's in a case, like in that master case that I was talking about. Because there's nothing worse than being, especially if you're on the road and you need something, you don't want to have to try to seek out someplace to try to get it. But here's just a list of certain things that I keep with me. And I'm sure you probably either do the same or maybe even have more than what I've got. But generally what I will always carry with me everywhere is I will carry a spare snare drum batter head. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have it might be an older one. It might be one that I've used before, and it's there. It's the proverbial, break glass in case of emergency sort of thing, which I've actually had to use that one time before. And what I do is sometimes, snare drum heads in general are a wieldy thing to just carry around. They're just weird. And I mean, if you're old school and have a trap case, there's slots that you can put them in. But what I do, I don't carry a trap case when I'm loading my own gear the majority of the time. I will actually slide it into a cymbal divider in a cymbal bag.
Okay.
And I've actually been okay with that. I haven't had any issues, with that drum head going bad or getting bent up or anything like that. So I'll just slide it into my cymbal bag. And then I always carry a spare bass drum pedal. Mm-hmm. I also carry a spare pedal spring assembly as well. And the reason for that is if I have Armageddon happen and I'm in the middle of a song and the spring breaks or something goes bad with that main pedal, I'll just reach back, grab the spare pedal, put it on. Then on a break, I'll just grab the spring assembly, the new spring assembly that I've got that I carry with me, put it back on the existing primary pedal and be ready to go. Because as well as I do, the changing springs these days is normally a pretty easy job.
Yeah, definitely.
Normally a drum key will get it done in just a minute or two. So I keep that spare pedal spring assembly with me. I use a moderate amount of electronics on gigs, whether it be running a metronome, whether it be running like in-ear monitors, or if I'm running sequences from a computer. And I always make sure I have an extra cable, at least one extra cable for every type of cable
Each
that
application.
I use. Yeah, because that is probably the weak link in almost any kind of electronics that you run is the cabling. And then I always carry extra batteries. Well, I hope there's guitar players listening to this.
Well, they're gonna be perking up when they hear that. And I don't have to buy any more batteries.
I know, and that's the thing, So yeah, I always keep a few extra batteries.
I actually buy the Pro Cells, like a box of 12 9. I use 9 volts, and I have that glorious old steel-bodied Shure in-ear pack, which I love. That thing's
rock on, man.
It's incredible.
That's become vintage gear.
It is by all means great compared to.
Yeah.
I'd tear that plastic one to bits. So I love that metal one, and it takes 9 volt, as does my metronome. So, and I have a problem with my metronome in that when I use AC, it's noisy. So I just use batteries on it.
Yeah.
And it's an expense, but I can't get around that. Just there's all kinds of noise with the AC.
Not only that, but have you noticed that there are certain whatever cable that you run out of most metronomes, whether it be like a Rhythm Watch or a Dr. Beat or something like that, have you ever noticed that if you use one of the cables that goes from like say an 1/8 inch to an XLR, crazy noisy the majority of the time?
Yeah, I use. I have an 1/8 inch to 1/4 because I just use a direct box and it's nice and clean.
Better.
The XLR thing gets a little wacky.
Yeah.
Sometimes in there some kind of crosstalk or something, but
Yeah.
it seems to, I have a relatively cheap DI and that 1/8 to 1/4, and it works out pretty well. So I don't run into problems with that. I run into problems when it's the AC adapter.
Just out of curiosity, do you carry your own DI or you use the sound guys?
I do. I will. On my gig, I use mine. I always ask if they have one, just because anytime you can, the least amount of cabling and things like DIs, if it stays with the PA company, all that, that's better. You're just not forgetting something. It's not. A mix up. Hey, that's my cable. That's my DI. Because sometimes, if you work for the bigger sound companies, a lot of times these guys are showing up at 0 hour that start tearing down the stage. Well, they weren't there for setup. They don't know that hey, that mic cable's mine, all that. So I kind of
and also
try to eliminate it as much as possible.
A lot of the guys that work for the big sound companies and provide PA and stuff, a lot of times they like to use their gear instead. They much prefer it. They're more comfortable with it. So that's
But there's been times when, man, I'm out of DIs. I got one, and they're just ecstatic. Like, you got it together,
right?
Yeah. Because there's certain gigs that I need to have that click, and and so I throw in a little 4-inch by 3-inch DI. It's not putting me out, but it just saves you when they don't have it.
So just a couple of other things that I throw in the old master case. I make sure that I have a few extra drum keys because we know, man, those things are like the proverbial sock behind the couch.
No doubt.
And one thing I made a little note here is I always, especially when I'm going on the road and I'm using backline, I make sure there's a sonar key in there.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I always make sure there's a sonar key.
Now, of course, I'll be going straight home and putting a sonar key in my little mic bag that I have all my. Yeah. Because I won't be able to go to sleep tonight if I don't.
That's right. Because
Thanks, Phil.
It literally could be anything from, of course, a whole kit, but you could even get certain pieces of hardware that might have like a memory lock on it or something. And
now I carry. With the exception of fly dates, I carry a Leatherman.
Oh, that'll work too.
And
the
sonar
flathead screwdriver.
Yeah, so there is if you don't want to purchase a sonar drum key, you can use a screwdriver. Yeah. Or a quarter if you're not going into, like core level tightening and tension.
The core guys prefer the silver dollars, man.
I thought they liked the 52 volt power drill is what it looks like.
Yeah. And then lastly, the last couple things, I just make sure that I have plenty of sticks with me. Make sure I have brushes. I make sure I have mallets, timpani sticks if need be. You never know if you have to either play I've had to play the occasional last minute timpani roll on something, or even yet, sometimes those things are just great to use on toms as well for certain things. I also make sure I have my little wooden multi-rods, and then I'm also a dinosaur that likes to use the old blastics from time to time. Oh, you're shaking your head, John.
I love those.
Okay. Yeah.
Those work. This gig I've been doing recently, there's a couple tunes that train beat kind of recorded with brushes thing. And
Nothing better,
There's
man.
just certain things that don't translate. Like if you don't have a regular sound man and you're not in a more intimate venue, sometimes brushes just don't translate. That's the perfect solution in that you get enough volume and enough snap out of them to create still that vibe. But and my blast ticks, of course, are all
They're hairy now. They've all
look like-
split and everything.
they look like
yeah.
the Wizard of Oz witch's broom or something.
Yeah. John, you got any extra pieces of gear that you like to tote along?
Man, I know what I don't have. I don't carry an extra pedal. I mean, granted, I kick like a girl, so it doesn't really matter. But that might be something I start thinking about. Because, as you get older, you want to carry more stuff.
Absolutely.
So I'll probably go ahead and do that. No, other than that, I always do the... I always have... I carry an extra snare drum. I don't know, with the exception of a low volume jazz gig, and I have to bring an extra snare drum. Like, I'm not going to change a head.
Right.
I'm just going to I have one sitting in the bottom of my double snare case that's dialed in and sounds great and very similar to my other. I think I have an Acrolite and a Superphonic. So, and they're both, similar tuning. I know I can throw it up and it's going to sound great and that. So that's my peace of mind there.
Yeah.
Instead of I don't carry heads, but a snare drum that's very similar to the one I use normally, and so I'm covering it that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, quite honestly, if I do break a snare drum head, there's going to be a forced break.
Yeah.
For the band, because that's one thing that I would have to do. I would have to change it. The last time, man, I actually, but the only time that I can recall breaking a snare drum head, actually happened just about 6 or 7 months ago. And I mean, it's unbelievable how it happened. It literally happened on like the last note of a song on a break.
Nice.
I mean, it's amazing, man, how that happened. I mean, you couldn't have, I was expressing myself at the end of like a trash can kind of a thing.
Apparently.
Yeah. And
no, I'm just thinking about how pissed I'd be that my entire break would be changing
a drum head. Yeah.
I'd rather be pissed about having to stand in line at the bar to get a cocktail. I'm going to brood on a break no matter what, but it's not going to be over a snare drum head.
Yeah.
Is what I'm getting at.
Totally a valid point, listeners. Yeah. And then lastly, on my day of the gig, right before I leave, I will check traffic. Mm-hmm. And then even when I'm in the car, I will use a traffic updated GPS. Choose the one of your favorite liking.
Right.
But I always make sure I do that because, especially folks, if you're in a city, traffic can change from the time you go to the garage and get out of the driveway.
No question. I've kind of accepted that I'm going to have to start leaving a little earlier now, just because of the nature of where I live. There's going to be some construction. It's just getting busier and busier in that corridor, and it is what it is, And I've always kind of had like, oh, I need 45 minutes to get downtown, or I need this and that, and you have to kind of recalibrate.
Yeah,
all of that by way of a city that's growing. So it is what it is.
John, let's say you have a sound check that's at like 5:00. What time do you like to arrive at the gig?
Well, if it's a venue I don't have a good handle on, I'm a dead hour. I gotta have just psychologically. I gotta have that. If it's a really easy load in, I might do like a 45, but I'm not interested in rushing or, being stressed out about being ready to go. And I mean, look, I could probably count on two hands in 20 years the times we've actually started at 5:00 for a 5:00 sound check. It's always taken. 15 or 20 minutes later we get going, but that's not an excuse for me.
And it's always the singers that are late.
Well,
it's unbelievable. And they have always forgotten something too. It's amazing. If they had to carry 1/100th of the gear that we have, they'd never make it.
That's Phil talking.
Anyway,
Singer friends.
I'll tell you,
But he's right.
if you don't take anything else away from this show, here's the one thing that John and I will stand on a table or stand on the top of a mountain and shout. Make sure that if you're loading your own gear, you have some wheels to load it in, like a cart. And then
The best $150 I ever spent.
oh my gosh,
was a big old rock and roller cart.
Yeah. Boy, talk about underappreciated gear, right? And the other thing is this, that John and I just absolutely we adamantly agree on this, is if you can eliminate a little bit of time and stress from parking where you're going to stay on a gig and then just rolling from there to the load in, that will save you a good bit of time and even some worry from the standpoint of going to a load in point, rolling your gear to a specific spot, then having to leave it, and especially if you're in a downtown area, is having to leave it for a little while to go park. If you can figure out a way that's okay with the venue and okay with the client to find a parking spot, unload there in that parking spot, and roll to the actual performance area without having to move your car again, you are golden.
I would go a block.
Yeah.
And that's why I have wheels.
Absolutely.
A good cart with good wheels, and it's, good over most terrain. I hate unloading a car and then having to move it. And inevitably, a lot of places we play, you're talking about catering trucks and, all this stuff too. It's like just being able to avoid all that is buy a cart, roll the extra 20 yards and make your life easy.
And John, if you want a justification for this, you can always rationalize and justify all day long that it's for your health. It's exercise.
Right. And you can write off the cart if you buy it.
Got that right.
There's a million reasons to do it, but
yeah,
we have a lot of long pushes. In venues here in Atlanta, and I'm sure in a lot of cities with working players, hotels and all that. And there's nothing more stressful than, what are you going to hope the venue has some carts,
Right.
Like, oh, no.
Yeah.
So that any working player will tell you they live and die by that cart, and it's awesome.
Well, I think everybody has probably gotten a bit of a horrifying glimpse into our psychotic brains.
It's way worse than we're even making out, I promise you.
But,
yeah.
This is the kind of thing, again, that you've heard us talk about before in the past. This is the kind of things that we talk about when we're just hanging out, But there is absolutely some value in it. I mean, John and I learn from each other all the time, as far as like, oh, I didn't know you did that. And, immediately kind of incorporate it into your routine and, find a lot of value in it. So hopefully we were able to do that today and kind of let you in on our mental process on what we try to do to stay current and make sure that we don't forget things and also save our peace of mind as well. So we don't have to be concerned about certain things. So,
right.
Yeah. So, John, we got some listener email.
I saw that.
We've been promising these people we were going to answer questions, So we're going to go ahead and answer some questions. And again, hopefully, if not every podcast, every other podcast or so, we will take these questions and basically give you our opinions on them and let you know what we think. So we appreciate that. Today's question comes in from a gentleman named Ian. And I will read his question. And let me say this. John saw his question, and Ian is trying to get his money's worth on this. I'm telling you, there's a lot going on this. So I'm going to summarize the question. And it has to do with chops playing or intricate playing. And Ian asks, many drummers have gigs and playing situations where playing with chops and using intricate playing is absolutely inappropriate. But he says it's fun to play and it's fun to stretch. So here's the issue. Not only are gigs where this type of playing is appreciated getting to be fewer and fewer, but because people's ever complicated schedules and even getting together to jam in a note-friendly setting can now be a problem. So how do you practice this type stuff in a musical way and hopefully make the stuff sound less like an exercise when you don't have musical feedback? That's a heck of a question right there.
Yes, it is. And I think you are wholly qualified to answer it.
I'm gonna make, man. You said some gold earlier that I'm gonna make you
All
talk
right.
about. But
Even in
Yeah.
rereading that, Phil is probably like, "Is he going to be okay?" I'm probably over here turning pale and looking like I'm going to fall out of this chair. Like,
he's having a sweaty back moment. But he's got a great answer for this. But I'll tell you my short answer to a somewhat long and complicated question is basically this: when I was learning to solo in certain types of settings, whether it be like a jazz setting or a fusion setting, every drummer always has this conundrum of chops versus musicality. And one of my teachers used to say it's always a balancing act. You're always trying to balance your technique with your musical ideas. And it's always a struggle, it seems like, between you either have too much chops and not enough musical ideas, and there's a problem, or it's the other way around. You have too many musical ideas, but you don't have enough chops to carry out the things that you're hearing. So what I like to do, like in my own practice and what I tell my own students, is when you are in a situation where you're having to solo, whether it's over the form of a song in a jazz situation, whether it's a free-form solo, or if you're like soloing over a vamp, like that's a big thing, especially in fusion type stuff, is soloing over a vamp. I always tell the students to mentally always have the song or the vamp or the song melody in your head. Base your chops-based playing on that. In other words, let the music dictate where you're going to go chops-wise, not the other way around, right? So, because the key to this is being musical with it. So you have to have some chops first off. So you do have to, Ian, you certainly do have to practice technique, but don't let the technique drive the actual solo. Let either the form of the melody of the song, or even the melody or the chord progression or the rhythmic things that are in a vamp, so to speak, dictate what you're going to play. And the same thing could even be said if you're doing a freeform solo. Even freeform solos, if you have musical ideas, whether they,
a theme.
Exactly.
Some of my favorite solos do.
Exactly.
And then maybe they revisit it.
Right.
Which is really cool. Building on it anyway.
Right. And John and I both like to use the saying, don't let the math dictate the music. You got to make music out of the math, so to speak, right? So that's where we're coming from, or where I'm coming from on this. And John, you've got some definite words of wisdom on this.
Well, I mean, revisiting a part of that question, how do I do that without any musical feedback and this and that? I guess one thing, there's a lot of available tracks out there now that you can kind of incorporate into your practice that, like whole songs, or there's, songs where you're trading back and forth and all that. And, I'd search out some of that, because then it is more of a musical setting as opposed to just, I'm going to figure out some 8-bar thing here and it's going to be drum centric and this and that. But, maybe build on some of the, like we talked about, themes. An obvious theme would be the melody of the song. Start thinking, in that sense. And again, you're not interacting with other players, but you could interact with the song itself and build on that and come up with some cool ideas. But the other part of it is, I'm coming from a different place in that I don't have a lot of chops, and I don't have, my technique is not even remotely close to being able to execute even ideas that are in my head. I have some pretty complex rhythmic things that go on in my brain that I'm, due to my lack of technique, I'm not able to execute. And so where does that put you? Sometimes it puts you in the position where you just tell someone, I'm not really interested in soloing. And some people are cool with that. You know, if you're back there just being the foundation and you don't want any, so to speak, there's guys that are, yeah, cool. Or if they do, you might be like, hey man, you know, maybe we just trade some fours here and there. And, you know, generally people are pretty cool about that. They know they don't want to A, hang you out to dry, and B, like, you know, most people don't want to hear me solo for an extended period of time. It's just not really going to go very, very well. But I do know that one thing that helped me, and I kind of found out some cool things about it, I started thinking like, okay, pyrotechnic drumming, the Buddy Rich or the Gospel Chops guys or the Dave Weckl, or, you know, I'm never going to have that together, and nor do I want to. It's just not what drives me. So I started thinking in the limited jazz gigs that I did, I started thinking about playing more like a horn player. What's some great inside swinging horn lines like and just kind of incorporating that naturally not thinking about which drum I'm hitting, like the tone, the pitch, just kind of interpreting that, letting it go and playing that on these drums are there. And sometimes they probably come out pretty cool, sometimes not so great, but just thinking not like a drummer, but like a soloist, a jazz saxophonist or whatever. And what I found out about that is then it kind of starts developing, you start developing somewhat of a unique voice, in that we could both hear the same, Clifford Brown solo and try to interpret it on drums, and we're going to sound completely different. But there's a voice there that is you. It's not, I'm ripping off Buddy, or I'm going to play this Dennis Chambers thing here, and
right.
You know, you're not taking all these licks you worked up and just tying them together. You're thinking completely different. So that was something that I stumbled onto, not being a chops player, that ended up pretty cool.
Right. Well, you know, one thing that I thought was just very cool about that concept is that, you know, I had discussed like taking different ideas or themes from melodies or vamps or whatnot, and let those things drive the chops. You're actually taking other ideas from soloists, which I think is very cool. You know, that's a great concept. In other words, things that were played prior to that, to your solo,
or just being exposed enough to jazz to like just hear some, random, oh, this is what a sax player would play. Just hearing that,
it's vocabulary.
It's like when we could scat for 12 bars on a blues tune, and it would be something I'm sure that we've in our listening just sort of took in,
right?
Or just being exposed to good music over many years, we could kind of create a solo that's melodic and playing by the rules and all that, but then incorporating it, and it really ended up being, wow, I kind of found some things worked out of that. So, well,
Ian, we hope that shed a little bit of light, on your question. And, again, the global thing that we're saying here is absolutely, you have to have technique, of course, but practice this stuff with musical phrases, musical ideas, songs, melodies, vamps, vocabulary from other soloists. Use those as your basis for the chops. Don't be chops driven for being chops driven. Let the music drive the chops, and that will serve you pretty well. So, well, we're going to close out today with one of our favorite segments. We like segments over here, and I think on the very first show we did underappreciated drummers, and so we are going to revisit that today. So John and I both have our underappreciated drummer of the week, and I'll let you go ahead and go first, John. Who do you have?
My guy is someone who has since left us, R.I.P. Gentleman, L.A.-based drummer named Mark Craney. And his probably most noted recording would be Gino Vannelli's Brother to Brother, which was a record I just lived and died by for a while, in that plenty of room to blow. He lets loose some, but, you know, really groove-oriented stuff and funky and almost fusion-esque in some parts of it and all that. And as a, you know, I think I really got on that record when I was like 19 or 20 and just early college period, and when you're into that. And this record kind of tied together a lot of things that I liked about music, and Mark was just, I can't even, you know, I know there's a lot of guys that know this record intimately. And he is someone that, you know, we don't talk about a lot, but did some pretty things outside of that Gino Vannelli run, did some other things. Like, I know you are more familiar with
the Jethro Tull stuff?
Yeah. And you could probably speak to that more than I could, because I didn't follow up on that as much, although I'm aware of it.
You know, I'll tell you the thing that I think is a common thread between Mark Craney and then my guy that I'm going to talk about here is Mark Craney had great chops. He could flat out play, but he was also a wonderful groove player too, man.
No
this
question.
guy could flat out play. And there's some, if you guys want to check out some live Mark Craney, there are some videos of him playing with Jethro Tull and playing Aqualung and Cross-Eyed Mary and some stuff like that, where he is tearing it apart, man, on a big old double bass Sonor kit.
I'll need to revisit that.
Yeah.
And check some of that out, because like I said, I've heard that stuff, but I was so locked into the Gino stuff that, and rightfully so, in that record, you know, it got a lot of attention, and Jethro Tull's definitely more of a fan-driven thing. Like you're either into them or you're not. But man, you know, like I said in previous suggestions, check this out. I think Brother to Brother is probably a good place to start.
Excellent, yeah.
And you won't be disappointed. He's incredible.
To our loyal listeners of the show, you'll recognize this is at least the second time that John has had major man love for a left-handed drummer on the show.
You know, it's all about my huge crush on Jeff Riley.
Oh my gosh.
Mutual friend of ours.
Friends are invading the show. So my turn, and I kind of teased it a little bit by saying that our guys had a common thread of having good chops and also good groove players. And my guy is Tom Brechtlein. Yeah, John's shaking his head. He's a bad boy, this guy is. And Tom Brechtlein has had an interesting career. He's played with some very, very different artists. And the ones I think where most people probably came to, or became aware of him was he was in Chick Corea's group starting in the late 70s all the way up to the mid 80s. And I like to tell people that are not familiar with him that he was the Weckl before the Weckl.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that.
You know? But
linear and just really together on a lot of levels.
Oh, yeah. I mean, massive chops. And a couple of those Chick Corea records that he played on that may not be as familiar as to some of the what we call the Korea standard kind of records that everybody has. He played on the records Tap Step, Secret Agent, and then the one I want everybody to check out that you will never find it, I seriously doubt you'll find a physical copy of it. You will find it, clips on YouTube, and you might find it, downloadable on a couple of sites like either Amazon or iTunes. There is a record from the early 80s. I think it's probably like around 83. It's called Again and Again, and it was on the old, now defunct Electra Musician label, which was one of those. It was one of those labels, of course, that Elektra put together that they knew they would never sell any records.
Right.
They just let these guys do whatever they wanted to do. And this record was recorded in South Africa. And it's my understanding that it was recorded when that band was on, like in mid-tour. So they were pretty much kind of, they had their game faces on. They were ready to go on this. And Breckline is just, he's out of his mind on that recording. So that's the one recording I want to highlight that everybody get a listen to Tom Breckline. And then if you go a little bit further on, when he left the Korea band and then Chick Corea had the super famous Electric Band with Weckl and whatnot, Breckline did a 180, man. He joined Robin Ford's group and played pretty much in a straight up blues band for years and years and years. But it was a blues band that John and I like to say has some fusion-esque sensibilities to it, because Robin was always good about letting his guys that played in his band have some solo space, and boy, they made the most out of it. So
and the majority of those players in his band were very similar to Robin in that just a lot of depth in their playing, not just a traditional blues guys. Robin always has that little bent, in his playing where there is kind of touching on some of that fusion-esque thing, and I've seen him live a couple times I saw that band in particular one time, and they really would stretch out. The thing with Tom that I the more I think about him, he's sort of, when we think about the Weckl and the Vinny and the linear modern players that have influenced so much of the Chops guys now, he was kind of into that. It was post just single note Billy Cobham, Lenny White fusion thing, and getting a little more into some of the, even Gadd in a way started going a little more in that, introducing some of that that linear thing, and Tom is overlooked in that in a lot of ways. He was that kind of cleaner, slicker. The sounds were more modern. The focus of the playing a little less brash and just muscular, and although it was a real focused and well thought out approach, he was in the game pretty early with that.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, he joined Chick Corea's band nearly 10 years, before Weckl, and was, like I said before, kind of Weckling Weckl before that.
That's true.
Doing that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, great call, man. He is such a beast.
So this week's underappreciated drummers, we got Mark Craney and Tom Breckline. Give those guys a listen. John, you have anything else you want to add?
No.
There you go. So, guys,
no.
Yeah, we'll see you again every Monday as usual. Again, look for news coming up. Please, go to our Facebook page at Drummers Weekly Groove, facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast. Follow us on Twitter. And then, of course, you can always email us at drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. We're going to put a button on it today.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
You got it. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.